All right, we are going to do a very interesting short little book called The Masters and the Path of Occultism by, I think it's Gottfried de Purucker. And this is from the Theosophical University Press. And I think he was one of the leaders of the Theosophical Society in that location at the time. So, well, let's get started. So, to the reader, this little volume is the second in the series, which opened with the story of Jesus. And I looked through the story of Jesus, just so you know, to see, because this here says it's the second in the series. It's not that I didn't find any value in it. It's just that at this point we've studied the life of Jesus quite literally in real depth. So I think we just leave it to the from Bethlehem to Calvary and some of the other books we've gone through and the explanations that Master DK has given. And we'll just leave them there. So, not that wasn't a good little read, though. So, as was the case with the latter booklet, so is the case with the present one. Selections and excerpts from articles and lectures of the undersigned have been made and brought together with connecting thoughts into the present little volume. Those who did the work of collation and preparation, whose names are mentioned in the prefatory note, the story of Jesus, are the ones who have continued their kindly work in this booklet and who will continue to do so in the booklets to follow the present one in this series. But as you can see, who are the masters, how the masters obtain their wisdom, the teachings of the masters, the secret doctrine of the ages. So this, what is occultism? These are great topics to cover and great seed thoughts and and perspective. We'll get started with the introduction. There is a hunger in the human heart for beauty. There is a longing in the human soul for harmony and for peace. There is an unceasing aspiration in the human mind for an understanding of the problems of the universe. And all these qualities of heart and soul and mind are fundamentally one, arising out of that amazing spiritual fire which dwells in the inmost of every human being, and which is a reflection of his human character of the divine flame, which is fundamentally the spiritual man, and this flame is the core of his being. Men yearn for truth, they yearn for light, they yearn for peace and happiness, and the last, in how slight a degree is this divine hunger satisfied? It is unsatisfied because men will not self-consciously realize who they are, what they are in the core of themselves. Their human consciousness refuses to recognize the living existence in them of this divine flame of the Spirit. Nevertheless, there is, through the ages, a pressure towards this realization, and when recognition comes, then indeed breaks the splendor of the Spirit on the mind and illuminates it divinely. The man's soul is then moved, and the very depths of his being are stirred, for he recognizes not only his kinship with, in the abstract sense, but his fundamental oneness with the universe of which he is a child, an inseparable part. There is light to be had because there is system and order in the universe, the results of flaming intelligences and cosmic compassion, and anyone whose heart impels him to carry on the search indefatigably and with a mental refusal to take discouragement at any time, but to carry on, will receive that light. When this recognition of his inner spiritual grandeur comes to him, then he recognizes also that there is spiritual grandeur outside of him, existing in other human beings. And he recognizes the kinship of other human spirits with his own, Thus the man who is spiritually awakened recognizes that other men also can be grand and great, and that their hearts are filled, as is his, with an innate and instinctive spiritual nobility. In other words, he recognizes that the divine is working in other human beings also, and that possibly in some of these other fellows of his, there throbs a heart which is more or less fully cognizant of its spiritual powers. The man then realizes that he may find others higher than himself, one or more who have become more or less at one with the inner flame of divinity, with the inner God, with the divine spirit stirring within. Such intimations or intuitions of the living divinity within us all persuade us beyond cavil or argument that our noblest aspirations are true, are based on fact. For in very truth, there are such greatly awakened hearts in the world. There are indeed such wondrous men in the world, men who have evolved to the point where the divine flame within, the inner God of them, is expressing itself more or less fully and according to the evolutionary stage of advancement of the individual. Such great men it has been customary from immemorial time to speak of as saviors of their fellows. They are indeed the spiritual saviors of men, the great and outstanding human spiritual geniuses of the human race. They have shaken men's hearts by the magic of their teaching, and by the example of their lives, and by their power to explain life's mysteries to inquiring minds hungering for truth and light. Look at history, see the great men that the human race has produced. Gautama the Buddha, the very embodiment of wisdom and love. Jesus, the Avatar, another embodiment of love and wisdom, and others of these great ones, whose names perhaps are less well known. And we realize as we survey these human embodiments of spiritual light that our intuitions and intimations are true. Then, as all men know, beneath these genii of the spirit and of intellect, there are, and there have been, and there will be in the future other men whom we call geniuses, men of wondrous ability, men of high and vaulting talent, whose souls commune with the very stars and pluck from heaven heaven's own flame of truth, and tell it in phrase and in teaching to their fellows. We know that these men exist. We know that the records of these genii of the race are written in living flame across the pages of history. Where then shall we pause and say that human genius cannot go higher than this level, or than that level, or than the mediocre plane which average mankind already has attained in its evolution? It is our theosophical teaching that greater men, even than those geniuses to whom I have last above alluded, exist in the world at the present time and existed in past times, and they have lived and taught and guided their fellow men, and these great ones compose a spiritual brotherhood of the great sages and seers of the human race. These are what are called the Theosophical Mahatmas. They are the elder brothers of mankind. They are men, not spirits. They are men who have evolved through self-devised efforts and individual evolution, always advancing forwards and upwards until they attain the lofty supremacy that now they hold. They were not so created by any extra cosmic deity, but they are men who have become what they are by means of inward spiritual striving, by spiritual and intellectual yearnings, by aspiration to be greater and better, nobler and higher. They are not what they are by any favoritisms, either of a god or of fate, but have merely run ahead of the great multitude of men. There they stand, they are helpers, they are seers, they are sages. They have not that they have by way of gift. All that they have, which means all that they are, all that they have evolved to, all that they have become, they have gained by self-devised efforts in individual evolutionary growth. All right, on to who are the masters. We now see just what these Mahatmas are: evolved men, men who have in evolution run ahead of the multitude of the races of mankind who have preceded us. They are men who have brought forth the powers and capacities of the inner God, of which each human being is but a feeble expression at present. These are the Tathagatas, right? As we learned, we talked about literally yesterday in the Voice of the Silence. They're our lineage who've walked ahead of us on the path and followed the path of those ahead of them. They are the great philosophers, the great leaders of men, the great thinkers, those who have swayed the hearts of multitudes and have captured their minds with the majesty and splendor of true thought. Think of man's intellect gauging the ways of the stars, probing into the very womb of space, counting the atoms in a particle of physical substance, drawing up philosophies and sciences and religions which have shaken the very souls of other men. This is indeed godlike. This is indeed more than mere genius. This verily is the working of the divine flame within, and verily we know is truly. So look again at the love which fills man's spiritual being, if he only will give it room therein, love which embraces within its compass the entirety of all things, the spaces of boundless space. What a divine faculty love is, what a divine energy it is. Think again of compassion and pity and our instinctive sense of friendliness and brotherhood. Think of men's yearning for peace, for harmony. All these are godlike qualities. They are divine qualities. It is an alliance with one or more of these inner faculties which makes man great, which makes him a genius, which makes him able to shake the hearts and move the minds of his fellow men. For when he is allied with this divine flame, it sweeps through him and sways him, and then you can see it expressing itself in all beings of the man who shows it, in all the being of the man who shows it. He then forgets himself utterly as a personality. He then lives in the boundless. He loses all thought of his personal being and lives in eternity. For during such times of illumination, his consciousness is taken unto itself cosmic reaches, and he feels with the vibrations of the atoms in the farthest Sirius, and vibrates sympathetically by reaction to the movements of the polar star. This is no mere poetical phraseology, it is actual truth. The Mahatmas are highly evolved men controlling powers over nature's forces, which they have gained through self-directed evolution during many, many, many lives in the near and distant past. Now they are become masters of life. In former ages they were men like you and me. In future ages they will become gods, just indeed as we shall, all of us, so become. When the destiny of the human race shall on this planet have reached its furthermost end for the present cosmic period of evolution. Because within each of us there is the individual's own indwelling inner God, the source of all that is great in us, and evolution is simply bringing out or unfolding what the man already and now has within him or above him. There is naught that is weird about these great men. They are the sanest men on earth, the gentlest, the kindest, the most pitiful, the most compassionate, the most brotherly, and the most peaceful, and the wisest, the strongest, the purest, the noblest, and the greatest. They do not stand, all of them, on the same step of the ladder of evolutionary progress. Some of them are very great, very high, others less so still. Then next in turn, there are their chelas or pupils, men who are striving to become like unto their masters, and who are a step or two or three ahead of the average man. And then we, the average men, find our place in the scale. Thus our masters of wisdom and compassion, the elder brothers of the race, have simply preceded us or run ahead of us in evolutionary development. All of us shall be masters of wisdom and compassion someday. Those who are such at present are simply those who are ahead of the multitude of humanity. They are active in the world all the time. Their agents are active always and everywhere. Their influence is always for good, always for brotherhood, always for kindliness among men, always for peace, always for progress and the gaining of a greater light, always for the things which give to men's hearts high hope and courage, and to their minds inspiration and love and rest. But this is not the rest, which is mere negative repose or sleep. It is, on the contrary, the rest which comes from the harmonious working of all one's functions and faculties, spiritual, intellectual, ethical, vital, and physical. Sometimes they awaken men when men have fallen to sleeping to spiritual and intellectual inertia and resting in the smug satisfaction of physical comforts. They then begin to call forth the soul of man, that fiery flame which stirs and moves within us and leads us to deeds of greatness and to imagination of sublime things. Yea, then they stir up conditions so that men shall awaken and begin again to recognize the call from within, the call of the inner God. They are our elder brothers because they watch over us as an elder brother watches over his younger brother. They are our teachers because they teach us through the ages. They instruct us and guide us. They are our masters because we are their pupils. It matters not that the pupil does not always recognize his teacher. In things of the spirit and in things of the mind, these great ones always follow the best path, the efficient path. They work through other men as their agents whom they have chosen from out of the multitude and who themselves are, relatively speaking, great men, but in less degree, and who become the pupils of these greater ones. The ancient teachings of wisdom, which have come down to modern men from immemorial time, have been voiced and taught and formulated and cast like thought seeds into the minds of men by the great seers and sages of all the past ages. These sages and seers are what the Chinese philosopher Confucius called superior men, superhuman men, and what the Greek philosopher Plato called godlike men, and what we in our pragmatical European age would call highly evolved men, or supermen perhaps, or superman. History records the names of many of them. The Buddha, Sankaracharya, Krishna, Jesus, it's called the Christ, Pythagoras, Empedocles, Plato, Apollonius of Tyana, Lao Tzu, Confucius, Zoroaster, and in other lands similar individuals whom only a name remains at present, such as Quetzalcoatl of Mexico and Manco Capac of Peru. They form an association or band or society. They have lived throughout the ages, each generation of them transmitting to succeeding generation the accumulated wisdom and knowledge that had been gained from immemorial time. They have wonderful powers over nature because they have learned to know nature. They work entirely with nature, with the law. That is the reason they are great. They are in harmony with things as they are with the roots of things. They are the servants of the law, and in that lies their power. They never work contrary to nature's mandates. They warn men as far as men will let them. They are warning continually. Every now and again they send forth from among their own number someone to teach men, to carry a new message of wisdom and knowledge of nature's secrets into the world. They have done this through the ages, warning, teaching, encouraging, consoling, constantly saying, "Come up higher, come to us." Jesus, the Buddha, Sankaracharya, all these great men have been messengers from the lodge, the Great White Lodge. Their teachings can be found in the great religious philosophies of the world, and today may be found in Theosophy. These great masters of wisdom are back of the Theosophical Society today. They sent forth H.P. Blavatsky from among themselves as their messenger and teacher to the world in this our age. The Hermetic chain, the light of the holy sages, is transmitted from messenger to messenger down the ages, and certain human beings can be trained to transmit that light in purity and in fullness. This chain of succession in teachers is what is often spoken of in Greek historical tradition as the Hermetic chain or the golden chain, and was considered among Greek philosophical mystics as reaching from Father Zeus through a series of spiritual and then noble human beings down to ordinary men. This was a teaching of the mysteries where it was fully explained, a true teaching because it represents distinctly and clearly a true operation of nature. More or less faint and often distorted copies of this Hermetic chain of succession of teachers was taken over by various later formal and exoteric sects who kept the fundamental idea of a succession of teachers of power. However much the fact became degenerated into a mere theory, such as in the Christian church wherein it was called the apostolic succession. In all the great mystery schools of antiquity, there was this succession of teacher following teacher, or, as the world would put it, of leader following leader, each one passing on the light of his successor as he himself had received it from his predecessor. And as long as this transmission of light was a reality, it was a spiritual thing. Therefore, all such movements lived, flourished, and did great good in the world. What does a teacher do? He shows the path. He evokes from within the latent and dormant faculties. He educates, instructs also perhaps, but educates, brings out what is within the pupil, leads forth his native powers. Instruction is merely filling the mind full of facts, good enough in its way and in its place, but it is not the true work of a teacher. A true spiritual teacher will take your hand and bring you, if you trust him, to the portals of the temple of the divine wisdom, and there, not he, but you, will give the knock, for this knock is not a knock of the hand. It is a manifestation ensuing from soul, from mind, and heart, that you have arrived at the point where you want more light, and your teacher recognizes that knock. The evolution of the race is like a rising along an arc for a time until it reaches a culmination of power and faculty. And then slowly there is a sinking as the faculties wane until the historic trough of the curve is reached. Then a new great one appears and directs men on another upward round subsequent to the one down which they had come. Each such upward round is a little higher in its culmination than the one last passed. This theosophical teaching of guides, of leaders coming to men in regular serial succession is one of our most beautiful and most consoling theosophical doctrines. I wouldn't say that's just a theosophical doctrine. This is, when the student's ready, the teacher appears, and that has been around for a very long time. So, the burden of the message of every such great sage and seer always contains the appeal to the individual man to awaken from his spiritual and intellectual slumber and to become more at one with the God within him. I am going to leave it there for today and let us sit on this. I would also add that these masters are, not only have they left their personality behind, they're completely selfless. And the interesting part about that is they don't do anything that isn't beneficial. And when they encounter humanity, they're always looking for ways to help in an immediate sense those that they do meet. It's really a very deep thing to ponder on that, to come to that conclusion that there are people, beings who everything they do is for the benefit of others. And that is an intense concept, and that's where this goes. That's where we need to get to, essentially. And it's very beautiful. And these are the masters of compassion, essentially, right? So, okay, I will leave it there, and we'll pick it back up with the third chapter tomorrow.